Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Simchak. I'm ESA's Director of Research and Programs. Thank you for attending today's webinar on opportunity zones. This webinar is being recorded and will be available in the members section of energystorage.org. All those who registered will receive an email with links to the recording and slides by tomorrow. Questions can be submitted at any time throughout the webinar via the chat box in your browser, and we'll come to those after our two speakers. Following the webinar, you'll receive a brief survey regarding today's topic and topics for future webinars. Your feedback ensures ESA continues to provide highest value information to you and your organization. We really do value your feedback, and we're always sort of scoping out future topics that would be useful and informative for the energy storage industry. All meetings and teleconferences of the Energy Storage Association are held in accordance with our Antitrust Guidelines. We ask that you abide by these guidelines during today's webinar. Full guidelines are available in the members area of the ESA website. If you're not yet an ESA member and would like more information, you can reach out to my colleague Richie O'Neill. Membership includes free access to all our webinars, including those that are exclusively for members, along with numerous other benefits. So please reach out to Richie if you have any questions and get any more information. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a brief update on upcoming ESA events. Registration is open for the 2019 ESA Storage Exchange. That's October 15th and 16th in Bellevue, Washington. Storage Exchange it's an event designed to examine the steps necessary to successfully integrate an energy storage project and evaluate different ways that companies are deploying storage to lower cost, reduce emissions, and establish a more resilient grid. You'll find registration, agenda, and more information at that web address there on your screen, energystorage-events.org. We also have a packed webinar schedule coming up. August 7th, we have our quarterly members town hall, which provides a briefing of current policy and regulatory affairs exclusively for ESA members. And we'll have many more webinars coming up, both for members and more broadly open. Keep an eye at energystorage.org in the events section for those. Today we'll be learning about opportunity zones. It's a fairly new mechanism designed to direct investment towards disadvantaged communities. Some really interesting opportunities there for clean energy. But I'll pass over here now to our speakers for today, John Bonanno from New Energy Nexus and Cody Evans from Homecoming Capital. After their remarks, we'll open up to audience Q&A. You can ask questions via the chat box at any time, and we'll read those out for the presenters when we get to the Q&A session at the end. So thank you for attending today's webinar. So I will turn over to John and Cody. All yours.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. And welcome to the ESA community to the conversation about opportunity zones, this new federal tax incentive, which we believe can be a game changer in your competitiveness. But I want to start by thanking Tom and Kelly and Jason and Sephoria at ESA and what a great job they do as the Energy Storage Association for our national framework. I had the pleasure of speaking at the Phoenix event in April, which ESA was the sponsor of, and it was fantastic content, and I encourage people, as Tom has already done, to become members or recruit members because this is a good organization doing good work. Let's go to the first slide here, if we can go forward. Do I control the slides or do you? Tom. Tom.
You should be able to control the slides. If you hover the arrow.
I should be able to? Okay. I didn't control that slide though. Anyhow. So Safe Harbor, we are not lawyers. We are not accountants. We suggest you take this up with your professional services providers. We have worked, as you're going to find out in the next slide. Let's go forward to the next slide, because we are not alone in providing this information to you. on an educational basis. We work very, very closely with DLA Piper, which is a top-tier law firm here in the United States and, in fact, internationally. And we also work with Greg Rosen, who is probably someone you've known for he's been doing clean energy, solar energy storage, electric vehicle mobility. And then Cody Evans, someone who I am very lucky to call a friend, and also one of the originals around Opportunity Zone finance in the United States. Cody, go ahead and give yourself a little introduction here.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm probably a new name to most of the folks listening. I started Homecoming Capital earlier this year with the goal of using capital to fight climate change. And our current strategy revolves around pairing the Opportunity Zone incentive with solar plus storage, or storage standalone projects across the country, located in Opportunity Zones, with the idea that we can use this new tool to create a bigger pie of value for developers, for the investors, and for the communities in which these projects take place.
Thanks, Cody. And you'll have a chance to speak with Cody on the Q&A, and also he'll be presenting a little bit later. The New Energy Nexus is formally, we've revamped the name. It used to be called the California Clean Energy Fund, which you're probably very familiar with, but New Energy Nexus is our new brand name, and it also does support our work around the nation and beyond. My background is as an entrepreneur in clean energy and not in clean energy. I've been involved with 9 startups as a funding partner or as an operator of those businesses. So all of this is very true to me because I'm also a survivor of 9/11. And for me, 9/11 was really just a result of bad energy, and we need to change that. Let's go to the first slide here, the next slide. Yeah, great. So Opportunity Zones is a place-based national federal tax incentive. It was first germinated under the Obama administration and then signed into law under the current administration. So as of December of 2017, the Opportunity Act became a law. And what that said is this is a place-based tax incentive where the federal Treasury is willing to delay and reduce capital gains liability in order to encourage large amounts of capital gains to be invested in what's constituted as low-income areas. The governors of each state were asked to designate 25% of their low-income census regions into this Opportunity Zone area, and you can go to easioz.org, and if you scroll about 2/3 down the page, there's a big map of the United States. You can click on it, and you can put in your project pipeline addresses and find out what projects are in and what projects are out. These zones, there's over 8,700 throughout the United States. They are literally everywhere, including almost all of Puerto Rico, which is, of course, quite exciting in their goals around sustainability and also the requirement for rebuilding after Superstorm Maria. We are very active in Puerto Rico, and we can have that conversation with all sorts of folks. So very exciting place, Puerto Rico, for us. What else to say about this is let's go on to the next slide here. So it on the face of it, it works in a relatively simple manner. Within a certain period of time, a capital gains investor takes their capital gains from an activity of liquidity, meaning they've sold something. They either owned Amazon shares, or they sold a house, or they sold an exotic car, or some sort of capital gains event. And this can be an individual, it can be a partnership, it can be a corporate, or it can be a foreign investor that has U.S. tax liability. They take that capital gains and they put it through what's called a Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund, a QOF, which is a requirement for a compliant transaction. Now, the capital gains investor, in our experience, also turns out to be the administrator of this fund. So think of the way we're looking at this as fund, small f, self-administrated, not big F with 2 and 20 carry and lots of fees and expense. We're trying to reduce the amount of expense and reduce the amount of requirement for third-party service providers like lawyers and accountants so that you, the developers, and the tax investor can actually reap most of the value of this, and also the community, in fact. So then from that Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund, the money is administrated into what's called Qualified Opportunity Zone businesses or business property. And we can, of course, get into more of those details. But that's the transaction. Now, there's a whole bunch of timing mechanisms around this, and we're happy to go into those details. But for simplicity, this is how the transaction goes forward. I want to hand this off now to Cody because he's going to speak from the capital gains investor point of view looking at clean energy projects.
Great. Thanks, John. So like I said earlier, there's obviously three parties that we're gonna speak to that are benefiting from this, and we'll kind of touch each in turn. But starting with the investor from our perspective, when you think about these projects and what this incentive does, it's really first and foremost it's a gain to the investor who's bringing a capital gains treatment into these projects, and they receive 3 benefits. They receive a basis adjustment on their investment of up to 15%. They get to defer their capital gains taxes on the money that's coming in until the end of 2026. And then when they hold their investment for 10 years, they don't pay any taxes on the proceeds from that investment when it's eventually sold. And then it's also worth noting that you can combine the opportunity zone incentive with the ITC to achieve a higher post-tax IRR. So what does that mean? That means from the developer standpoint, that means that when you bring in an investor who has the ability to use the opportunity zone incentive efficiently, you create more overall value at the project level that can be split between the investor, the clean energy entrepreneur, and the community. And while originally that's all seen by the investor, how that actually occurs will be subject to negotiation when the project is being acquired. And from our standpoint, it's important as investors to recognize those 3 parties and make sure that each is seeing part of the value of this incremental incentive so that that's being split among all the parties and encourage more people to do this work. So from the standpoint of the clean energy entrepreneur, from the developer, conversely, you should see a lower cost of capital in these projects. And what you should see is that if you go out and develop projects in opportunity zones and you find investors who have that type of capital, then they should be willing to transact at a slightly lower cost of capital, which should lead to higher development fees and better investment terms for development, and also a wider field of capital providers. I think this is something that we're really excited about from the standpoint of how this incentive works, is it's bringing in a lot of high net worth individuals into the clean energy space who historically wouldn't have thought to invest in this way. So you're now seeing a larger pool of buyers for projects, buyers who might be able to both buy the projects at a lower cost of capital and themselves achieve a higher return, and therefore hopefully encourage spread of these projects across the country. And then of course the community is also benefiting from these. So the goal of the Opportunity Zone incentive is to bring additional investment into low-income communities across the country. And when you look at the types of communities that make up these opportunity zones, a lot of them are areas with heavy manufacturing, heavy air pollution, a historical abuse of the energy sources that are in those regions. And these types of projects offer a really promising chance for people to clean up those energy uses and also benefit from the economic gains that are resulting from that work. So at Homecoming, we've formed our investment thesis around sharing that value across the community, the entrepreneurs, and the investors. We're actively out looking for projects that we can partner with developers on to invest in and to get across the finish line. And our goal is to use this incentive to maximize the value that we and developers can share in doing these projects across the country at scale. So with that, I will pass it back to John to talk about kind of the example project that they've already completed at EZOZ.
Yeah, let me go back a second, Cody, because I want to drill into what are the responsibilities that you see from the developer that can bring you a good project. What do you see as sort of the 3 or maybe 4 key metrics that an energy storage or a solar plus storage developer needs to have in order to come to you to get attention and ultimately financing?
Yeah, I think for us, the key question to start is the proposed project in opportunity zone. Personally, that's very easy to check and see. You can go online, look at the maps, make sure it's in one of the zones. If it's a new project and it's in one of the opportunity zones, it is very likely to qualify for the incentive. And then the question is just at what stage is the project at? And for us, we like to purchase projects as close to NTP as possible, which means that you should have at that point the PPA under contract, site control, and interconnection all wrapped up, and a pretty good look at what the economics will be going into construction.
That's great. Thank you for that. I'll now pivot to EZOZ.org, again, as a reminder to everyone, is a nonprofit offering, and we have 3 bits of work that we do. The first is we make clean energy economy participants aware that this new federal enormous tax incentive is used by our clean energy brethren. So you're now aware, consider yourself aware. The next thing is we educate on this by doing partnerships with the ESA and others around webinars and education content. On that site, we've got a white paper that is free to download, and we make all this content available. So this deck is available to anyone who would like it. And it has a lot more slides after this, but for the purposes of brevity, we've simply left it quite simple. Our first project that we were introduced to was with a solar developer in Delaware. They have a 500 kW ground-mounted system, solar only, with an off-taker, which is a HUD facility, a low-income housing authority. They had site control. They had a power purchase agreement with the housing authority. They came to us and they said, can you help us create a qualified opportunity zone fund? And so we created the opportunity zone fund for them. They are the administrator of that fund. The capital gains investor has now made their investment into the fund, and the fund has now distributed the capital to the project. And we are going to be cutting the ribbon on that project with people from Washington, D.C. relatively soon. In that process, we also provided standard contracts. So part of our service is not only forming the entity for them to transact, which is a requirement by the stipulation of federal law, at least by Treasury, we also provided them with standard contracts. So an operating agreement for the fund, which is a contract that needs to be done in order for the transaction to be legitimate. We provided the contract for the capital gains investor to the fund, and then from the fund to the equity investment vehicle, which is an SPV in the state of Delaware. So our work was frankly very difficult on the first transaction because it is so new. I really see that we're sort of at the second batter, third batter of the first inning of a very long game. And so energy storage developers, whether you're doing standalone energy storage, whether you're doing hybrid systems with solar, whether you're doing electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which is kind of related to energy storage, any of this stuff, we feel that it is certainly within the clean economy, and we will support you in learning the mechanics of this, learning the use case, helping you benefit from, as Cody said, Smart Capital is looking to share this value so that they can create a more robust pipeline. So folks like Cody, and Cody's one example, but he's representing a significant amount of capital gains looking to be deployed. And, you as developers, you as equipment manufacturers should really consider how you want to use this new tool. We can go forward to the next slide. It's really just pictures of this particular site that we worked with the developer in Delaware on, and it turned out great. Everyone's very happy. The developer got a bigger fee, which they were very happy about. The HUD facility, the Housing Authority facility, got their project sooner because the tax incentive works in a way which makes everybody speed up their velocity because there's some timing mechanisms on compliance. And so they got their project sooner, which they were very pleased about. And then, of course, the capital gains investor got some benefit, additional return as well. And all three parties are happy. This is one of 4 examples. We've transacted 4 times now. In all cases, the capital gains investor was the administrator of the QOF. It doesn't have to be that way. It just seems like it makes the most sense in the transaction for it to be that way. And so our doors are wide open. We're a nonprofit, as I say. We do not compete with you as a developer. We don't compete with folks like Cody. We don't compete with the community people. We're simply trying to accelerate all of your success. We want to see energy storage projects go high velocity and high scale as quickly as possible. So I think we're going to go forward to the next slide and we can do some Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much. Very interesting. Reminder that folks can submit their questions via the chat box, which you'll find over the bottom left-hand side of your screen. So the first question we've got in here from Eric Richardson. How can Opportunity Zone financing be utilized within existing tax equity financing facilities, either partnership flip or sale leaseback?
That's a good question. This is an equity investment. So it cannot invest in the debt side. It's not going to be senior. It's not going to be encumbering an ITC investor's position. We haven't seen any, or at least very, very little ITC involvements in projects below 15 megawatts. So if you're seeing a lot of activity at the ITC level at that smaller scale, certainly bring that to our attention. We haven't seen a lot of that. In the case of this Delaware project, which was 500 kW, the capital gains investor was also the ITC investor as well. So in that case, it was a very specific example where the capital source had both income and capital gains efficiencies that they were looking for. So they captured both of them there. In the other 2 QOF formations we've done on behalf of capital gains investors, the case is the same, where those balance sheets are big enough or the capital gains investor also has ITC abilities. That's what we've seen. When you start dealing with bigger projects where you have, let's say, U.S. Bancorp, J.P. Morgan, whomever it is, doing a big piece of ITC work, we don't see technically why there's any reason that it should not work, because the OZ investor is taking a sponsor equity position. And we've seen for decades now sponsor equity positions being sold to third parties without any challenge to the ITC structures. So we see that as possible. I would, in fact, love to hear Cody's view on this too, because I know you're dealing with this on a structuring basis.
Yeah, I think the question around partnership flip and sale leaseback, people are really still in the early innings of figuring out exactly what structures work and what structures don't work. At this stage, there isn't yet a very clear template formula for how to do this. That's frankly kind of the work that John and his team are doing, and where their early experience in doing this is really valuable in order for them to start sharing that with the world and to make this a much easier road for others who are on it. So I think, in theory, the restriction on the opportunity zone investment is just that it is structured as equity, and that may enable partnership flips, may enable sale leasebacks, and the exact structuring considerations are fairly complicated and are still being worked out in real time.
Great, thanks so much. Our next question comes from Anders Glader. He asks, are there size restrictions on eligible projects? And I might expand on that. Are there size considerations? Is there a point at which a project is so small that the sort of logistics of the structure doesn't make a lot of sense, or so big that there are other options which are better to consider?
There's two sides of that coin, actually. I think there's kind of an arc here. If you get a project that's super enormous, the economics are already so squeezed that it's difficult to make it pencil for the equity anyways. So I think you're seeing these giant, enormous projects outside of strategics or for some other roll-up purposes. You're not seeing the private investors saying, hey, I think a 5 is good. You're not seeing that. So I think there's an outside game here of, let's say, 250 megawatts and beyond becomes a little bit of a stretch to use OZ. That being said, we are working with a developer in Texas on a 200 megawatt project where they're raising $70 million of opportunity zone money. So it is happening on the outside there, but I think you're getting to the outer limit. On the inside, by the statute of the law, there is no restriction on how large a single fund can be. It can be any size, and you can execute on any size project. So there's no limitations on that. But I did want to finish my statement by saying that on the inside, we're seeing that anything that requires less than about $25,000 on the equity becomes really challenging. Because we as a nonprofit organization, to provide service, we charge $3,000 per QOF. And to give you some perspective, a law firm will charge approximately $75,000 to $80,000 to set one of these up. We thought that was incredibly inefficient, and it would limit the market. So our $3,000 per QOF setup is a relative steal, but you do get into a place where if the equity doesn't require, let's say, $25,000 to $30,000 in a single investment, it becomes challenging because now your costs are going to now start bumping into the return.
Oh, perfect. That's really interesting and great to consider. Charles Westgrove says, my project is in Texas. What are ERCOT implications? People say it's tough in Texas, but the potential is huge.
Depends how much of that is contracted power. But I'm gonna hand this off to Cody because in fact he looked at that 200 megawatt project that we were working on, and I think it had some hair. But Cody, you wanna talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's beautiful about the Opportunity Zone incentive is it's federal, and the requirements are all around the investor coming in and their own tax status and them having capital gains, and then the projects meeting some qualifications that, in all likelihood, all new storage projects should meet. So whether you're in Texas or North Carolina or Puerto Rico or Minnesota or California, the answer should all be the same to those questions because it really just relates to the investor's tax liability and the type of thing that you're investing in. And the fact that you're in ERCOT or anywhere else doesn't add any layer of complications beyond the normal complications that arise from being in ERCOT or any other market.
Yeah, I would also add to that the Opportunity Zone tax mechanism is not a silver bullet. The underlying project equity needs to merit an investor's attention. It's going to make a good deal better and share more value across to all stakeholders, but it's not going to make a bad deal or a nonsensical deal make sense. So just really careful on the developer side. It sounds like there's a lot of questions with hybrid systems, solar with storage. Obviously, someone asking about ITC, that's clearly the case. Just as a developer, you need to be clear that there's got to be site control, there's got to be a credible off-taker, there's got to be environmental stuff done, et cetera, et cetera. This is not like a freebie where you get to throw all your junk at the OZ investors and they're like, yeah, no problem, hit the bait. This is a very serious, diligent exercise, one that you've been doing as members of this ESA organization, I'm sure, for years. So the equity must merit investment, and in that case, opportunity zone capital can be brought to bear and bring more value to the project, thus bringing more value to each of the stakeholders.
Great, thanks. I'll remind everyone that you can submit questions via the chat box in your browser there. Peter Zillow asks, for developers without a PPA yet, but who are developing a project in an opportunity zone, what benefit to the project economics should the developer model into the pro forma? This guidance increases chances of securing a PPA, a prerequisite to presenting the project to my opportunity zone folks.
I'd say, Cody, you should probably take that.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this. Yeah, so we've seen a lot of folks, frankly, mismodeling the opportunity zone incentive into their projects and then getting a PPA that makes the projects not economical. And so my recommendation for right now would be to actually not model this into your PPA at this stage and to keep that as kind of back pocket upside that you can use when you get closer to the ending stages of a project and inevitably some cost arises that you didn't foresee, or the cost of capital comes in slightly higher than you thought it would be, or something else happens. If you give away too much of the value too quickly, I think it could come back to haunt you. And I'll also say in the market so far, because it's so new, there aren't a whole lot of players who have raised dedicated clean energy opportunity zone capital. As John was saying, a lot of the early projects they've been doing are people who already had that capital and are using it for their own projects. There's not too much third-party capital out there. So you might find if you model it in that then the capital partner that you ultimately choose to go with may or may not be able to take advantage of the opportunity zone benefit. So this is one of the areas where we're obviously acutely focused because we have raised that third-party capital and we are looking to partner with developers to finance these projects. But given that it's such an early stage, we don't recommend that you give away that value quite yet. Although hopefully down the road, when everything's a little bit more certain, there will be justification for doing that and being more competitive in securing PPAs, as we say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the first step for a developer, rather than trying to figure out what the economics look like after you apply opportunity zone to the sponsor or some portion of the sponsor's position, I think the first thing you should do as a developer is you have a pipeline of projects. You should go and find out what's in and what's out of the opportunity zones. And you can do that very easily again, go to this easyoz.org, scroll 2/3 down the page, click on the map, and then there's a bar where you can put in the physical address of the property. Do not search cities, do not search counties, do not search states. This is an excessively specific precision tax instrument. And you can be on one side of the street and in, and one side of the street and you're out. So it's extremely important that you go and qualify your existing pipeline or your sales prospecting to be laser focused. First and foremost, the other thing I would say here is, the developer has an opportunity to take some additional money off the table here if you do it right. And Cody's point here is he's using the word partnership specifically. And I know this just because I've worked with him now for a year. And his view is he's got an enormous amount of capital gains to deploy, specifically in clean energy stuff, and energy storage certainly fits into that bucket, and hybrid systems do too. But it is a partnership that needs to be created through trust and through open hands and through open modeling, where he's saying, don't you go try and model it. Let's just do it bare bones. Let's forget the OZ even exists. Let's look at this project on the merit. And then when I apply the opportunity zone capital, that's when we're going to share that pie. But he's using partnerships specifically because some in the development community have often thought of finance partners as a little adversarial, and with some good reason, because there hasn't been a great track record on people sharing and being equitable. I think this is a very, very different tool, and Cody also said something that was important, which is this is not the usual suspect sponsor equity purchasers. This is a whole new bunch and class of capital gains investors. Literally anyone with capital gains can use this tool. So there's a couple of really key things that I wanted to tease out, just based on our experience, based on what I know about Cody's experience, really, really important to drill into, and I wanted to reinforce those messages about partnership and transparency.
Great, thanks. Reminder, folks can ask questions via the chat box. Petr Guryev asks, are there job creation or other qualification requirements that you have encountered for energy storage or other projects? And what suggestions do you have for ensuring early stage projects are able to qualify besides geography?
So the federal statute has no requirement on job creation. I think it's a missed opportunity by Treasury. These projects will be constructed in low-income areas, designated low-income areas, and I think the potential for job training is quite significant, and the potential for job creation is quite significant. By federal statute, there is no requirement to either measure nor comply to a hiring rule or using union labor, for example. We think it's a missed opportunity by Treasury to make this a really super high impact financing tool, but they haven't done that, nor do we expect them to do that.
Thank you. Petr's second question, are capacity payments and merchant revenues something that opportunity zone investors will underwrite, as in the case of a standalone storage project?
Cody?
Yeah.
That's a money question.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually think this is very tied to the earlier question of how should you model the benefits into a pro forma when trying to secure a PPA. And I think the answer is, for right now, at the early stage of this incentive, wearing a developer hat, I think you look at this as pure upside. And you need to assume that your project is going to be financed in whatever is your normal financing mechanism for doing this. It needs to pencil out according to that, and you need to make sure it's a sound project. And then once that is insured, if it happens to be in one of these geographies, then absolutely you should expect that smart, sophisticated investors will make the same decisions and allocations about risk that they normally would for projects of this nature. The only difference is they're going to be coming in with the knowledge that their returns are a little bit turbocharged by this incentive. And then over time, knowing that those returns are a little bit turbocharged, they or we should be able to share that with the developer. And then once the developer knows that, then in future subsequent projects, once those partnerships have been formed, once those relationships have been formed, then you can go out and start bidding the PPAs differently, viewing merchant risk slightly differently, viewing the capacity payments slightly differently. But I think in general, it's very safe to assume that a sophisticated investor bringing opportunity zone capital will look at capacity payments and merchant revenues the exact same way that a sophisticated investor who's not bringing that that type of capital would.
Yeah, I also would add to that, you're 100% agree with what you just said, Cody. I also would like to add that as soon as our experience so far as a nonprofit just being a facilitator in the middle, what we're seeing is that people that are executing these projects and seeing the benefit across the stakeholder group, of which has been shared, so what Cody's referring to as the sharing of that value, it is happening. And because of that, we're seeing organizations change and modify their sales and marketing strategies, focusing on specific opportunity zone areas, whether it's Puerto Rico or whether it's another part of the United States. It's really quite interesting that additional benefit, if the underlying equity merits the investment, everyone's making more money. Well, geez, let's go find a lot more of these projects. And we're seeing that delta right now, and it's pretty exciting because the point of the tax incentive is to encourage long-term capital in low-income areas in the United States, which in turn creates more economic value, job creation, energy resiliency, low-cost electricity. There's so many benefits to the things we do in clean energy that it's a great virtuous cycle we're seeing to start.
Thanks. Question from Lincoln. What kind of value can equipment supplier / manufacturer expect from the Opportunity Zone tax incentive besides more upcoming possibly energy projects in low-income regions? So kind of what's the benefit to suppliers and manufacturers?
You can expect that if a manufacturer is manufacturing in an Opportunity Zone, that business can potentially be an Opportunity Zone business. So if they're offering a new share class at that location to do maybe a new manufacturing facility, that could be something they might consider. They might start prospecting Opportunity Zone sites to be a new manufacturing facility. In fact, we're working with a lithium extraction company in Southern California because their sites are in Opportunity Zones, and they're planning to put manufacturing facilities there to extract the lithium, to put it into a battery, and blah, 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 all that stuff. So we are working with manufacturers already around that exact thing. Now, how it relates to the project, it goes back to what Cody said before. This is all baked in to the EPC contract, right? And that's part of the SPV to which the capital gains investor will make their investment. So if the equipment manufacturer knows that it's in an Opportunity Zone, well, they can work with the other stakeholders on how they may take a little bit more value in that situation.
Thanks. Reminder, everyone can submit questions via the chat box. Do you have any sort of examples or case studies of where projects have slipped up and sort of where things have gone wrong as folks have pursued an OZ project that would be informative and help people not hit those same pitfalls in the future?
Well, from a giving, an education point of view, we see the strategy that delivers the most value to the stakeholders. And again, I'll reinforce that stakeholder. Who are the stakeholders? It's the capital gain investor, it's the developer that's creating the property, and it's the off-taker. And it's the community in which this happens. So those are our stakeholders. We've seen a lot of confusion, and frankly, we feel that there's a lot of risk when you have a pooled capital qualified Opportunity Zone fund. And you're probably hearing a lot about it around Skybridge, and there's some other very high-flying, well-publicitied, quote-unquote Opportunity Zone funds where there are professional fund managers taking 2 and 20 carry, and they have a lot of marketing and blah, 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 all that stuff. We think that in order to transact where the value of this tax incentive goes directly to the stakeholders, the only strategy is a 1-1-1 strategy. And so what we mean by that is, I'll give you an example. an energy storage facility in a CNI environment behind the meter, off-takers credible, etc. The project needs $1 million in sponsor equity. Okay? What we would suggest is that the developer find a capital gains investor that wants to do that $1 million. And in that case, the capital gains investor comes to us and they say, hey, can you create us a qualified opportunity zone fund? We create that fund for them. The capital gains investor is the administrator of that fund. They take their $1 million, they put it into the fund. They use the sample contracts that we give them, so there's no hard work there. They then inject their capital into the equity position. The developer gets to take a little more money off the table. Potentially, the CNI customer gets to reduce their costs too because there's some sharing going on, and the capital gains investor has a good outcome as well. The reason why you use this 1-1-1 strategy is because as part of the law, the fund must comply twice a year for the entire duration of its life. Again, as a reminder, this is a long-term tax benefit, 10 years in fact in some cases. So every year on June 30th, on every year December 31st, that fund needs to report to the IRS that they continue to be in compliance. This is a technicality, but it's very important because the last thing that a fund manager or fund administrator wants to be doing is paying a lot of money to lawyers and accountants to be in compliance in this twice-a-year episode. So what we suggest is if 100% of the money is deployed into the position, then there's no money in the fund, it's a single-use pass-through, and instantly in compliance. If more money than $1 million is needed, then you just get another capital gains investor, you set up another QOF. So there's always a 1-1-1 relationship. Equity position, one QOF, one capital gains investor. And that, I think, will really help simplify the ongoing compliance requirements because they can become a very significant cost if you don't follow this strategy.
Excellent. Thanks so much. That brings us to the end of the number of questions that have been submitted. John or Cody, any last facts or remarks that before we wrap up that you think would be key for the group?
I think just one last comment on that last question. We've seen a lot of people try to take projects that are either way too early in their development to know the economics, or they're late in their development and the economics, frankly don't work and they're kind of broken projects. Try to kind of pull a Hail Mary with this opportunity zone financing. And I think there's a real risk of this becoming a distraction for you if that's kind of the strategy that you employ. And a much better strategy is to just focus on developing really good projects and develop them in these opportunity zones because there is this nice extra kicker to investors for doing that. And if you do that, the investors will take care of the work of making sure that they comply with John's point, which is very true around the complexity of how the investors are bringing the capital into the zone. And the investors will also take care of the kind of splitting of that value with the developers once it's all been realized. And if you find yourself working with investors who aren't doing either of those things, then I'd really question whether or not they're the right capital partners to be working with. And if you find investors that are, I think you can view this opportunity zone thing as something that doesn't slow down your development at all, but that enables you to grow the pie for doing the exact same amount of work that you'd be doing otherwise. And eventually, down the road, should become part of how you go out and site projects to bring more capital into these areas, bring more clean energy into these areas, and then, get compensated for doing that.
Yeah, I would, in addition to what Cody said, which I 100% agree with, I think it's important to understand what value this thing, we're talking about value, but how does it model? We've done some work, again, with our partner, Greg Rosen, who is an extraordinarily experienced modeler of these clean energy projects, whether it's an inverted lease or flip structure or whatever. He has modeled conservatively and without ITC, so single OZ investor taking 100% of an equity position in a middle-sized solar array. So we've only modeled solar only, not with storage, but it kind of works the same way. The return increases to the project-level company are in the range of about 17% NPV increase, net present value. And if that's not illustrative to you, I'll also say that the IRR, the rate of return, is also another metric, same number, same value creation, in the 250 to 300 basis point improvement range. Now, I've been doing clean energy a very long time, and in order to achieve that type of value creation has really taken significant breakthroughs or very specific arbitrage opportunities like SRECs or some other types of situations. On the regular bog standard stuff, let's say below 100 megawatts, in order to get a delta of over 50 basis points on your IRR improvement takes an extraordinary amount of work and extremely clever. But if you're like me or like the rest of us, we can use this tax tool to create incredible value, and it's not meaningless. It is real, big value creation, which, as I've reinforced over this call, in partnership with these OZ investors like Cody and others, this value is shared, and everyone gets a little bit more out of it. And the only one that takes a little bit of a hit is the federal tax group, Treasury. They're saying, we'll delay our tax liability and we'll take less of our tax liability. But what do they get out of it? They get more money being invested in clean energy stuff in low-income areas that creates an enormous prosperity. So will the federal government get paid back for these forgivenesses? I believe tenfold. And that's why we do this work.
Fantastic. Thanks. Really great sort of closing perspective there. So that brings us to the end of our presentation today. Thank you very much again to John and Cody. Very informative discussion of this new and unique opportunity in opportunity zones. Before I leave you today, once again, highlight the 2019 ESA Storage Exchange, October 15th and 16th in Bellevue, Washington. If you have any questions regarding any upcoming events or webinars or ideas regarding topics to cover later in the year, please email them to us at education@energystorage.org, or you can submit those in the Ready Talk pop-up that you should get when you close out of the webinar system. We do value that feedback, so please let us know. Thanks so much. Thanks again to our speakers. Thanks to all of you who've joined us this afternoon, and have a great afternoon. Goodbye.